because they did so well with the Nook.
I can't believe they just introduced a new one.
What the fuck? No one cares about the Nook.
Box with a capital G, ball in the beat. Status Chris Paul or John Wall in the league. Grab a mic till the knuckles will bleed. Cause I believe the potent and I'm potent have you geek like speed.
Welcome to the 3% Podcast. This is Chad, host from Open Letter Books. I'm here with Tom Roberts from Riff Raff.
That's right.
And it's been a few weeks, I guess. It's been longer than I thought it was since we last recorded.
You were traveling. I traveled to see you, but then also just this weekend I was out in San Francisco. Or north of San Francisco. Anyway, here we are, both at our computers in our respective homes.
Were you at Sparks' wedding?
I was, yes.
Awesome.
And I should begin, because he's going to hate me for doing this, Adam and Ashley from Transit Books.
Awesome.
Whom I hadn't met before, but within like a minute of having met him, he was like, this is really surreal for me. I listen to the podcast. Blah, blah, blah. And somebody else was like, oh, what's this podcast? And Adam gave this like a detailed explanation of what it is. And of course did mention that, it's fairly irregular in its scheduling or whatever. Anyway, he's a listener. And so that's our shout out to him. They are, of course, the people behind Transit Books, which is publishing their first book in April.
Yep.
And he told me he just saw you at Consortium's sales conference and all of that. And so they are, motivated after being there and meeting the sales reps and all that sort of thing to, get publicity and marketing all lined up and get ready for the launch and all of that.
Yeah, they're really cool.
They're really cool, and they seem to be doing things the right way, and I hope they succeed.
I do too. We had a good time at the Honky Tonk Central.
It was in Nashville. That's true.
It was in Nashville, and we actually took Ross Uffberg of New Vessel and I took a bunch of the sales reps to the Grand Ole Opry too, the Ryman Auditorium, which was actually amazing. Like, I don't usually listen to that type of music, but in person is so cool, and to like see that space and like how they run it as a 2-hour program, as a 2-hour radio show with like half-hour breaks where every half hour is hosted by a different sort of host who brings on different musicians and introduces them and does like little stories and jokes. It's really cool. Like, it's a really cool experience. So if you ever are in Nashville, anyone listening, you should definitely, it's worth checking out, even if it seems sort of hokey and sort of whatever. Speaking of, I'm going to digress before we get into our thing. You have to hear this sign. So it's in Nashville. This is one more Nashville thing, but you guys, everyone that's listening is going to absolutely love this. I just have to find it. Okay, so around town, like they do in most towns, they have like those plaques to designate or honor like really famous people from Nashville, right? Okay, so here's the one that I found first. William Walker, the gray-eyed man of destiny. Born May 8th, 1824, Walker moved to the site from 6th Avenue North in 1840. In early life, he was a doctor, lawyer, and journalist. He invaded Mexico in 1853 with 46 men and proclaimed himself president of the Republic of Lower California. He led a force into Nicaragua in 1855, was elected as president in 1856. An attempt to wage war on Honduras was captured and executed September 12th, 1860. And I don't know why this cracks me up so much. Of this dude is just like, I'm just going to invade Mexico with 46 dudes, and now I'm president of part of California and take over Nicaragua, and why not wage war with Honduras?
Wait, and that guy gets a plaque?
He's got a plaque. He's got a plaque. You could do anything in the 1800s, apparently.
It's true.
Just like, I've never heard of this guy, but he's probably, I bet you tons of people are like, oh yeah, I know he's really famous. He's like, in all the history books, he's a crazy guy, but like, yeah, that was the most wild. I also found, and this one's more unnerving in the way that it's phrased, but Timothy Dimambron from Boucherville, Quebec, was the first white man to live in the Nashville area.
That's weird.
Isn't that the oddest sort of phrasing? Not like first European, it's a white man in Nashville. It's very weird. He ended up opening a tavern.
As one does.
As you should. Absolutely. So I guess other things that have happened since our last podcast, we had our gala, which you and Emma came up for, which was fantastic. And thanks again for doing that.
No, it was really fun. And of course, I won the raffle in which we were entitled to go jump on trampolines for an hour the next day, which we did.
Yep.
Which is fairly absurd for the four of us adults to be in there, but whatever.
That was great.
That was great. That was a lot of fun. What else? Two things I suppose we knew that the public learned about via sort of rollout of publicity and everything was that our friend Stephen Sparks and his new wife, Molly, parent, I don't know if she's taking his name, presume not.
She's got a good last name already.
Yeah, they were announced to as the buyers of the Point Reyes bookshop in Point Reyes, north of San Francisco, on the California coast. So they're taking over the store January 1st. It's been around for a while. It's in the middle of like a national park, not too far from the coast, in a very small little town. But they love it up there. They are Northern California outdoorsy kind of people, and it was just an opportunity they couldn't pass up. And so they've raised most of the money and are doing what Em and I, well, actually, no, they're doing a Kickstarter. So you get, for contributing, you get little, I forget what they call them, rewards, benefits.
Uh-huh.
I forget what the phrase is via Kickstarter. But anyway, So they're doing that to raise the last little bit of money they need. And then just Friday, what? Oh, Emma is correcting me to say that it's Indiegogo and not Kickstarter.
Oh, okay, yes, we should make that clear.
As if there's a difference. But
I'll try and find the address, though.
And it was announced on Friday that Brad Johnson from Diesel, their manager / lead bookseller at the Oakland store, to be clear, is also launched a community lending program modeled after mine and Emma's for Riff Raff, which was also modeled on Greenlight in Brooklyn. And they should be credited here because I believe they've helped Brad with contracts and language much in the same way that they helped us. They've been incredible good sports about that. They want more good independent bookstores to exist. And Brad is trying to buy the store from its current owners, John, and I'm blanking on the woman's name.
So am I.
But they're getting older and they want to sort of, divest themselves from certain parts of the, they have 3 stores that they own together. One in Brentwood and then one in Marin County as well, and plus the Oakland one. And so he would take over the Oakland store. He has plans to rename it and call it East Bay Books, but it would largely stay the same. It's an institution over there in Oakland, so that would be a good plan.
Yeah, it is John Evans and Allison Reed.
Allison, that's right. Who is fantastic. Every year I see her at Winter Institute, and she is so much fun to hang out with.
Yeah, I really like John, too.
They're old socialist hippies,
yep.
And, they're really good people. That's it.
So one thing to update there with Indiegogo, there's no way anyone's going to remember this. I'll just put a link on our page, but it's Indiegogo/project/a new chapter for a beloved bookstore books community, hashtag, with all words having a hyphen in between them. So I'll just link to it. But they are, at this moment in time, they have 4 days left, and they've raised $29,278 of their $30,000 goal. So they're very close. If this is up in time and you're listening to it, you should consider going and backing them.
Yes, I think it's also, you can find it, if you link to it, it's fine, but I think you can find it if you just go to the Point Reyes Bookshop website.
Oh, that makes sense too.
Because there's a page about them taking over and all that sort of thing.
Yeah, that's perfect. Other than that, one other thing I know that's happened is I went to the Neustadt Festival in Oklahoma, where Dubravka Jurecic was awarded the Neustadt Prize for 2016. And I've known of this prize, sort of, in bits and pieces, just that it was like given out every other year, that it's hosted and sort of managed by World Literature Today, which is at the University of Oklahoma, which is why the event takes place there, that it's endowed there, that it has a very large gift associated with it, $50,000, and that people have referred to it as American Nobel, but I was never even quite clear on why that was. So I went there, and first of all, the festival is fucking amazing. Like, they do a ton of stuff. They did a play performance of one of her short stories. They had opening reception, a really fancy closing reception at the Natural History Museum. That was like, I think there was like 300 people there. Maybe not that many, but it was a lot. And they did like readings. They had a couple of readings. They had one academic thing, and then the part that I was most excited about was that every year they have a couple prizes, and every semester there's a Neustadt Prize class you can take in which the students will read all of the winners' books and then meet with her or him and interview the writer and do special things during the festival. So it's a really cool way to engage like students in that environment and in that way to meet these authors. What I found out in writing a piece for LitHub about this, because we wanted to get some attention for the award, so I wrote it for them, and they posted the article along with her acceptance speech. But what I found was that the reason it's referred to as the American Nobel is that a significant number of the winners and judges have been a judge or a winner and then went on to win the Nobel Prize. So they've almost like preceded the Nobel Prize for 18 to 20 different authors. So it's just weird. I think it's just a weird coincidence or whatever. They're trafficking in international literature and the best of international literature. So eventually those people win things like the Nobel Prize. But that's why it gets that moniker. But the people out there were fantastic. World Lit Today is really cool. I met the daughters of the person who sort of endowed it. And they're really interesting women, too, who are very passionate about international literature and reading and exposing people to these sorts of writers. So it was really like a very cool experience to actually have, much unlike a lot of other what you could have been. It wasn't like staid and annoying. It was very fun and enjoyable. And seeing Dubravka is great because she's always like witty and funny.
So they have a history of, are there who's won it before that has won the Nobel?
Yep. I can find this again. It'll just take me a second. But yeah, they've got a thing that's like a demo, what do you call it? Like an infographic that shows information about the prize, and it references that within there. If it's loading, because it's slow. Come on. It's like this big, long, huge graphic. Okay, so 32 of its laureates, jurors, or finalists have gone on to win the Nobel Prize, including these laureates: Gabriel Garcia Marquez, Milos, Octavio Paz, Thomas Tranströmer, and then their jurors that have won were Heinrich Boll, Joseph Brodsky, James Coetzee, Odysseus Elitis, Mario Vargas Llosa, Derek Walcott, and Eli Wiesel. And then their finalists, there's a slew of them that have won, including Alexeyevich, Günter Grass, Doris Lessing, Toni Morrison, Mo Yan, so on and so forth. But it's been around for 45 years and seems like frequently they just precede the Nobel Prize in weird ways, either by being like a juror or finalist or laureate. So hopefully Dubravka will win the Nobel Prize herself at some point in time. In fact, we are actually going to be doing, it looks like, we don't have this all finalized, but it looks like we're going to be doing another one of her nonfiction books in 2018, which will correspond to our 10-year anniversary since she was the very first author that we published. It'll be perfect that it'll be 10 years exactly to the day that we publish another book of hers so that she can kind of round out our first 10-year existence. But anyway, enough of the Neustadt stuff. You wanted to talk about this article that you sent from the New Yorker called What Barnes & Noble Doesn't Get About Bookstores?
Yes, this seems like forever ago, and even it was only 3 weeks at this point, but it seems like a lifetime ago that I was concerned with this article. But it is by David Sachs from the October 21st. I assume it's in an actual issue of Barnes & Noble, not just online, but who knows. And is about the CEO who was a CEO and then stepped down and is now a CEO again because Barnes & Noble has had some restructuring, to use the euphemism, of late as they try to make more money because they've been sort of beaten down by Barnes & Noble, by the economy in general, and if we're being optimistic, by the rise and continued rise and steady increase in the market share by independent bookstores. And they talk a little bit about all of this, especially this all comes from their announcement, which we did talk about back in, I want to say March.
Yeah.
For them to open what they're calling concept stores, which are these ones that are going to have, instead of just cafes worked into the space, which I mean is fairly common in every Barnes & Noble I've ever set foot in, but they'll have bars and full-service restaurants, including breakfast, lunch, and dinner.
The worst part is that full-service restaurant, though. The description of it.
It's not to say that I wouldn't like to eat a meal in a bookstore. It's just in a Barnes and Noble. It just in what scenario is Barnes and Noble's restaurant going to be your best option for food?
Yeah, but it's going to be Scandinavian looking.
Yes. There's a quote in here. What does it say exactly?
It says those stores will have Scandinavian-looking cafes with fully licensed bars serving breakfast, lunch, and dinner. But it ties back into his earlier quote, Riggio's earlier comment where is it? Where he says like the difference between independent bookstores and Barnes and Noble is that independent bookstores have better cafe and food experiences.
Right. I mean, he does say that.
Which I think that's so funny.
It's crazy. He says, I mean, he admits what the problem is. Believes the biggest shift in the book retail business, besides the internet and Amazon, was fundamentally demographic over the past 15 years. And for the record, this has been a lot longer than 15 years that this has been happening. But as young Americans and their families returned to urban centers in significant numbers, the market for independent bookstores became viable once again. The retailers that are now resurgent in those areas are typically populated by smaller stores because the architecture of those spaces are small. Which is the big problem. Oh, part of this concept store, I can't believe they're calling it a concept. It's a fucking bookstore with a restaurant in it. There's no concept.
Yeah, that's like a corporate term.
But they're also going to be 20% smaller than their average store, which is still massive compared to...
That's in here too, because the 20% is not big enough. Yeah, it should be much smaller than that.
Right. Because their stores are massive, massive spaces. Even like, I'm trying to think of the last one I went into. This is at least a few years ago, but in like rural, outside, where the hell was it? The name of that city, Palm Desert, which is next to Palm Springs, has a Barnes & Noble, and it's massive. That city must have like 4,000 people that live there, and it's got to be 4,000 or 5,000 square feet bookstore. So if you're reducing that by 20%, it's still 3,000 square feet? I mean, that's huge. The average, Greenlight, which they reference here, is maybe 2,000 square feet, being generous. And that's probably including like office space and everything. Their floor is maybe 1,500 square feet, So they need to really, really downsize if they really want to make these places feel intimate. They don't say that word in here, but to me, that's what they're trying to go after, correct?
I think it's, to be more boutique, to be more special and less of a cookie cutter. There's two things about this that jumped to me right away. One is that it's going to be very difficult for Barnes & Noble that has created systems over its existence to deal with selling books on a massive scale. So giant stores, 680 of them or whatever number it is, being able to buy things for all those stores that are essentially essentially Barnes & Noble is just bookstore. Like it's just generic as all get out. And to make that function, and that functions well enough in society, people need a place where they can just go get books, generally speaking. And they don't need to speak to a person. They can just go get a book that's on display and leave with it, and then none of the rest of it matters. You have to create a lot of internal systems and ways of logistics and ways to deal with that. To then downscale to something that's much smaller and more community-oriented requires a wholly different set of skills of being connected to the community, of being able to do things on a very individual level. You don't want just books generically in your smaller concept store. Assuming that's, smaller than an 80% of a normal Barnes & Noble to begin with. But if it is like an actual small, like independent store, it has to be tailored to that community, which requires someone on the ground with knowledge of what people want to read in that area, of who your customers are, of all that sort of thing. And no company is well suited for that. The second thing is, this article has a weird contradiction in it that I don't think I noticed until this moment, was that they say that the independent stores have been on the rise because people have been moving back to truly urban centers, away from like the suburban giant stores. But the place where they're opening their smaller concept stores are in the suburbs of Minneapolis, Sacramento, Dallas, DC, and New York City. Yes. Not in the cities themselves, which is the thing that they're indicating earlier on, where the growth of this sort of boutique/independent bookstores have been growing. Doesn't that seem like a weird contradiction?
I think it is a weird contradiction that it definitely has an explanation that he doesn't want to admit to. For this, I want to address both things. But to address the second one first, this, I think, is explained by the fact that what he means by urban centers is not specifically like people moving back to New York City or back to Brooklyn after they've been living way out on Long Island or New Jersey or Westchester. What he means is that people are moving close to those places.
Okay.
Not all the way downtown, but what they want and what these people expect of these communities that are close to these urban centers are these small sort of walkable downtown areas.
Right.
Even if it's like one strip with, all of your generic, and I don't mean that as an insulting way, but just like if you had to like say, okay, what do you expect a small walkable downtown area stretch to have? It's going to have a cafe, a bakery, some sort of clothing boutique store, something for your pets, a bookstore, one sort of restaurant and like a wine bar, right? Everything else after that is sort of gravy. But those are the basic sort of things that developers and planners and that, residents or potential residents all sort of look for in a neighborhood. And so he's trying to fit Barnes & Noble into that model, not necessarily the, Soho, New York model.
Fair enough.
To be clear here, I think he's only doing that because it's too expensive an experiment to do this in Soho.
Yes.
Right? I mean, I don't know what rents are in the store that's opening in New York is in Eastchester, which I didn't even know where it was. Of course, I'm only knows of Westchester. But presumably the rent in Eastchester is cheaper than, keep going back to it, but Soho. Like if he really wanted to compete with McNally Jackson, which he's not going to do, that's where it would have to be. And so the gamble, because I'm pretty sure that they understand that this is a gamble. No one thinks this is a guaranteed thing to succeed.
Right.
Otherwise, they'd have plans for more than 5 of them. So that I think explains that. Where what he means by urban is not necessarily like population of 4 million people. I think what he means is the exurbs or whatever you want to call it. To go back to the size thing, everything you said is absolutely right. And I will say this only as somebody who's trying to open a small business in a relatively decent sized town, but it feels like a small town where we had not lived before. Familiar with the area, I grew up not far from here. My mother used to live here, etc. But like truly living here, we've been here for 6 months already, and I still feel like every day I'm learning something new about the community, right? So Barnes & Noble would have to say, like, okay, we're going to open a store in, for example, Providence, which there is not a Barnes & Noble here. There's one, I think there's one in the entire state, and it's nowhere near, it's like 20 miles away.
Really?
There's like crap at the mall. Like if you told me another sub chain that isn't Barnes & Noble, I might recognize it. But
apparently there's one in Middleton, Smithfield, and Warwick.
Yeah, Middletown. I always forget about that one. But yes, Warwick is down near the airport. So, but yeah, we have several used stores around here, and then there's 2 new stores over by the Brown campus. One is the university store, and one's a couple blocks away. So there's no space really for a big chain. But part of the reason is, and there aren't big spaces here to rent. One, which a lot of these communities that I think he's trying to target aren't necessarily just smaller spaces to rent. But 2, if you do want to hire somebody who truly knows the community, who understands what these people want to read, what the issues are beyond that, what the demographic makeup is, people's just sort of habits, people's ways of, greeting each other, all of that sort of stuff. To find somebody who has all that experience from a retail point of view, not just books point of view, from simply a retail point of view. Barnes & Noble doesn't pay well enough to employ those people. And that's a huge problem because the way that they make money, their profit is based on what you were talking about, which is this efficiency. The shipping, the ordering, everything is, put into these models, no matter where they are in the country, and everything is just okay. You only have X number of shelf space for poetry. Here are the books you get. If you have one more shelf space, you get these titles. Nothing is sort of tailored to a specific neighborhood, and they don't want to pay somebody who could do that tailoring. They pay cashiers, and that's it. They're not going to pay somebody with the experience in each community to do it. Now that might change with these concept stores. But my guess is they're not. I mean, these chefs are not going to be famous chefs or anything. The menu might be designed by someone famous, but there is no famous chef working in each one of these stores. You know, it's going to be branded, and that's what it is.
Yeah, the way that you would deal with it, I think, would be to empower the employees at the local level. So, like, your fiction managers, whatever, like a generic fiction manager, but they're from Providence. So you hire someone from Providence, and you allow them to order whatever books they want for stock.
Right.
Or like that sort of that pushing and putting a lot of the burden of like the choice making, decision making into the hands of the local level employees, but that's not what they normally do. So it'd be like just a different managerial style, I suppose. Right.
And to be fair, they have been saying that they were going to do this for like a decade, that they were going to empower local employees to choose what books get, put on piles on the table. They've been promising that, leaking that, saying that, and maybe not just publicly, but I've been hearing that from salespeople at Norton and salespeople at Penguin and Random House. The people who communicated with them at those places, communicated with Barnes & Noble, have been saying this for a long time.
Yeah.
As a way of promising publishers that they're getting more, consideration for books, and that you could, possibly get somebody's ear and make an impact on an individual store. That never materialized.
Yeah, because as long as Penguin Random House is willing to pay whatever astronomical sums of money it is to be displayed on end caps and on front tables, there's no motivation on their part. You'd just be like, oh, we'll lose some of our revenue because we want to be individualized and at the local level. That's a tough sell, especially because they did so well with the Nook as like a revenue source for them.
I can't believe they just introduced a new one.
What the fuck? No one cares about the Nook. Like, literally, I don't think there's a single human being who's like, oh, wow, I can't wait for that to come out. Like, who buys that? No, I've never seen anyone using a Nook, ever.
I wouldn't know, but I seriously think you're right. I think I've only ever seen the Kindle, or people using their iPads.
Yeah. You can even use the iPad with the Kindle app, but you never see someone just carrying around a Nook. The only place they exist are in these damn stores. That's all they're going to remove. That's 20% of their store right there. But
all right, the display space for the Nook.
Yeah.
Right, which is like the subsection of the store that just looks like walking into a T-Mobile store, right?
Yep.
Like 1,000 square feet, but your product is 2 by 3 inches, and you only have 10 of them. So you just fill it out with carpet and plastic display space.
Yeah, but people like the Apple Store, and it's kind of supposed to just look like that. Like you just walk, people like that. Well, they'll like it here too, right?
Exactly like that. People like Apple products, though. There's a big difference there.
But I think some people like going into those Apple stores, like just generally, just touching things. They like to touch screens a lot. Dream of the day in which they can hold one of these in their own palm. Anyway, I don't know if there's anything else to add to this.
No, I think the only thing is that this store is opening, like the one in Eastchester is opening like this weekend. So hopefully somebody will go and give a report on what it's like to be in this space. I would like a plucky young reporter, to go to Eastchester and have breakfast and then lunch and then dinner and maybe a drink afterwards in the same space.
That would be the best. If someone did that and did a whole report on it, that would be wonderful. Just sat there reading books inside their store, eating their food all day.
There was somebody, I think it was, I'm going to guess Gawker, I could be wrong, but somebody, maybe Vice, a woman went to one of the first Starbucks that offers wine.
Oh.
And she went in at like 4:30 and was like, all right, I'm going to treat this Starbucks like a wine bar and like see what happens. And so she, just sat at the bar and like tried to chat up the people next to her. And of course, 1, no one knew that they actually served wine. 2, everyone she talked to was like, yeah, I'm here on a coffee date with like a coworker or whatever. And it's like, just no one wants to have a drink in Starbucks. It was just huge.
That would be awesome, to go into Starbucks and just get fucking loaded. Just like as quick as possible and just talk to all the baristas.
And everyone's staring at their laptops.
Yes, exactly. Trying to write something for Medium, personal essay about their time struggling with whatever, and you're getting wasted and interrupting them. That would be super fun. That would actually be super fun. So, but anyways, yeah, I hope if someone does go there and listens to this, let us know what it's like. Take some pictures. That'd be pretty entertaining.
Yeah. I assume they're Scandinavian-looking cafes. Just means that they're buying all their furniture at IKEA, right?
Yeah, that's what I assumed too.
It's cheap.
Yeah, it's cheap and like with no extra frills. It's just like a piece of wood on top of metal, like stainless steel bars. That is what it will be. It's going to be so funny. Anyway, I guess we'll move on to our other main topic. The thing that I wanted to talk to you about was, and this relates to every spring, I've talked about it on here a bunch of times, I teach a class on world literature and translation in which I designed it mainly so that students that were in the translation program, especially the graduate students, would have one class that's completely dedicated to reading books in international literature, talking to translators, and evaluating and talking about them both as books within like this larger context of world literature, but also as translations themselves. So this started years ago now, and it's gone through a few iterations. And most recently, I decided to like really ramp up the number of books that we read of fiction in order, and giving people like kind of like what I used to do is I'd have like a segment of like a few weeks where they read samples from all over the world, and then I would use that as a basis of talking about the new books that were coming out and trying to link them up. And instead I'm eliminating that section and just sort of working it in with each book. So they're reading a lot more books, and I've tried to get as broad as possible, ranging from like books that are very funny, like the Irish book The Dirty Dust / Graveyard Clay, in which we get to talk about humor in translation, but also two translations of the same title, which is always fun. They're going to talk about like The Q, which is like sci-fi or speculative fiction from Egypt. The Sasha Sokolov book Between Dog and Wolf, which is basically almost impossible to understand, and the plot's very simple, but like all of it's based in like the language of it, just fun. Last Wolf by Krishna Horkai, Savage Theories by Pola Oleksarik, or how do you say her name? Things like that. Zama as a classic. And I also wanted to include a thriller or a crime novel. So I included to talk about like kind of the plot and language and how you end up translating thrillers, or how, and like the language and the basis of those. And so I chose semi-randomly Rage by Zygmunt Miłoszewski. I know I'm saying that wrong, which is published by Amazon Crossing of all places, and is translated by Antonia Lloyd-Jones. And I chose it because I met him and I thought he was cool, because I didn't have Poland as a country, their language I had a different book from. So it's the only Polish book. It's maybe the only really that part of Europe, Central European book that I'm including. And because Antonia Lloyd-Jones is really spectacular and brilliant. So I thought like I'd read this book, which I can tell you a bit more about, but it's more or less like like a procedural about a prosecutor in a small town in Poland, and uncovering like a sort of conspiracy or group of people that are working together to punish people who don't do anything about domestic abuse. So it also has like a good message behind it in some sense of like, and can raise a lot of questions for debate on how to deal with domestic abuse, but it's useful and interesting in that way too. And the guy fails at the end. Like essentially the prosecutor, it ends horribly, which I think is interesting too for dealing with the plot of a crime book. So I was planning on is like additional materials, having them read this book and then have some samples of other books that Antonia has translated, so they could see like the range of her writing styles, how this differs from some of the other writing styles that she's translated. But I also thought it'd be good to give some sort of quasi overview, or at least some notes on like who other major writers of crime fiction are, and like what sets them apart, or what's different. So I thought since you're expert in this and read a lot of these books, that you could give us sort of a bit of an overview of some different authors, and I could ask some dumb questions, and then the two of us could sort of preview a few crime books that are coming out in translation that sound interesting to us. So I guess the first thing is, I know you said you prepared a few different authors that you wanted crime authors that you wanted to talk about. So I guess it would be probably easiest just to start with one of those.
Yes, I have three that I would consider straight crime writers, in which And this is, important to have this sort of definition because we in the U.S. have two different distinct histories of what get thrown together under crime. There's noir, which is typically an anti-hero. Maybe it has a private detective, but he's clearly somebody who operates on the dark side of the law. Perhaps the people he's working for are also on the dark side of the law. There are also things like the Parker novels, which total anti-hero in that the hero of the books, Parker, is a thief who does a series of heists. Every book is about a heist, and the thrill in reading them is figuring out how he's going to pull off the heist, because obviously these being, books that require a problem to overcome, there's, something snags, somebody betrays him, something goes wrong, et cetera, et cetera. And so you're rooting for this thief to succeed. And, they do temper it a little bit. He never kills anybody. He only injures them. He only robs from people who deserve to be robbed, that sort of thing. And so you get this sort of, he's Robin Hood basically.
Right.
So there's noir. Then there's, William Gaddis, or not Gaddis, Goodis, David Goodis. Sorry. Wow.
I was going to say, William Gaddis would be a really interesting crime writer too.
That would be an interesting crime. David Goodis does stuff where there's not the same character. You just get a sort of dark portrait of the seamy underbelly of American culture, where everyone's looking for the get rich quick scheme, and they think they've stumbled upon it, and they try to pull it off, and of course it's illegal, and by and large they fail. But what you get a look at is these sort of morals playing themselves out in the criminal underworld. And so there's those books, and then there's crime books, in which you have a detective trying to solve a crime, which happens at the beginning of the book, and it's being done in the name of justice, right? You want this person brought to justice. We want to purge society of this, nasty element. And so they do an investigation, and they take it wherever it leads them. And the thrill is figuring out, along with them, who's guilty, what was their motive, and how can you capture them the most efficient way. And so I have three crime writers which feature detectives of a sort, and then one which I think is probably more noir, but which comes from a different part of the world and is interesting for that reason. So that introduction done. The first one I have here his name is Giorgio Scerbanenco, who was born in Russia, or in Ukraine at the time, but moved to Italy at a very young age and, wrote in Italian and lived there for the remainder of his life. He is considered the godfather of, which I suppose this makes sense, the godfather of Italian crime books. And the prize for crime books currently in Italy is named after him. So two of his books have been, I don't read Italian, two of his books have been translated into English by Melville House as part of their international crime series. They are two from the quartet of books called the Milan. It's just called the Milan books or something like that. They feature a doctor, a man who was a doctor, a trained doctor, who at the beginning of the first novel is just being let out of prison. He was in prison for having performed euthanasia on a dear friend, which of course was illegal in Catholic Italy at the time. This was in the 60s. He is then immediately, so he can't practice medicine anymore. Being a small town, sort of on the outskirts of Milan, he's recruited by somebody to investigate something, take care of somebody, basically to become a detective. And it's done basically, one, because everyone knows he's trustworthy, and two, he's just a really smart guy. And so he falls into becoming a detective. And this is a very common thing we see a lot in American crime books like this that toe the line between crime and noir, where you get this reluctant detective sort of character.
Right.
And he's a very good one. He investigates these things, and it being Italy, and I think this is something we'll get to when we talk about the differences between this book and then the next one by a Swedish writer, is that the way he works within Italian and Milanese society, I think is and the way it's done in the book, I think is very reflective of Italian culture at large, in the way that there's, everything sort of overlaps. Everybody knows everybody. Everybody knows everybody's doing something a little that they shouldn't be doing, but it's all sort of forgiven in the name of helping your brother. It's only when, something truly outside the mores of society do people get involved and start asking questions and investigating. And they even the police are very, they do it by the book to a certain degree, but they're also happy to this detective who's not even an official detective, who's a doctor. They're happy to have him help, and they just sort of allow him to do what he's doing. And it's not frowned upon. He's not looked at as some vigilante or anything like that. Right. And it's all done with this, very Italian sort of subtlety in which they talk to each other. For your purposes, I think, with your students, I think it's interesting to see the language that the detective and then the police and the criminals all use when talking to each other. I'm talking about the actual dialogue.
Right.
It's a very sort of Italian, gentle forcefulness. If you've seen The Godfather, just imagine, the way that they talk to each other. They're right. Insinuating very serious things, but they do it in this calm sort of way. And this book doesn't involve the mafia in any way, but it is that trademark is there, where there's this air of sophistication, but they're in fact very nasty people.
Yeah.
And the detective, of course, stands out just a little bit, because your detective has to stand out a little bit. And then he's this very upright, moral person who's sticking up for the rights of a woman who's been abused, much like in your thing. Mm-hmm. It's a very common thing to have these people be, slightly more moral than everyone around them, even though they sink down a little bit to do it. But he still has to, they say the best detectives understand the criminal world, right? I mean, you can't just go in and shoot everybody up and understand what's going on. You have to try to understand the criminal mind. And that, I think, is, in a book at least, your options of showing that are you're reduced to the way that a detective, sees the world when you have your descriptive language, or you have dialogue in the ways they talk to each other.
Yeah.
And Scerbanenco is a master of really getting that subtlety in both dialogue and descriptive sort of passages in the book.
Right. That's interesting. There's a couple things that come to mind. One is that terms of the style for it. What strikes me when I read this book, and I've read crime books before, is that for the translator, what you really need to focus on is slightly different for a book of crime or within the genre than, say, a very poetic literary novel that doesn't necessarily have a plot. With this, you have a plot to rely on, and that the tone, the pacing, the dialogue, those sort of elements are the most crucial, versus the sort of poetic nature and subtle allusions and intertextual references that you might be focusing on in a book that is not it's not as plotted and is not as direct. It doesn't have that kind of moral message that's coming across, something that's a little bit more poetic, I guess. I'm going to keep going back to that word, which is not good, but whatever.
No, it's true. In every chapter in a crime book needs to advance something, right? There's a signpost worked into every chapter. There might be asides, but even the aside is advancing some element, right?
Yeah.
And the translator working with that original language has to make sure that those signposts are hit in just the right way at the right time within the chapter. You can't give it away too early. And this goes down to sentence level, a lot of, think about, a cliffhanger at the end of a Harry Potter chapter or something. It's very similar. It's you can't reveal the thing. You have to hold on until the very last second if that's what you're working towards, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And, sometimes that doesn't work as easily if you translate, verbatim. You have to sort of reconstruct sentences and passages to sort of fit the goal of crime writing, as opposed to just translating verbatim.
Yeah, totally agree. The other thing, are you surprised that he only has 2 books that have been translated? As in Italy, he's such a big deal, and that even to the point, what you said, that the major award for crime writing is named after him. That seems surprising. I mean, you can say this about any person, any area, that there aren't enough books that are translated from the area. But when someone who has this sort of reputation, I'm really surprised that there's only these 2 books that are available.
Not only that, it's recent.
Yeah,
Those were both
2014.
Yeah, and these were written in the 60s. I mean, I don't know a lot about him. I do wonder if politics played a role at some point in him sort of not being, the favored child among like Italian agents and people who would try to push this onto American readers or international audiences. I also don't know that international audiences look to Italy as a place for crime writing. At least not in recent years, the focus has definitely been on, Norway, Sweden, Finland. Before that, France, a long, long history of French crime books. You know how these things go. There's these tides that go back and forth of these writers from different places that become more popular for whatever reason. I just don't feel like Italy has had its moment with crime writing. There's been, at least not this kind of crime writing. Like
mafia stuff, obviously.
Right. There's like Donna Leone, but she actually writes
in English, doesn't she?
Right. And then there's the guy who, I'm totally blanking on his name. But they're like very quaint mysteries. Like, I'm totally blanking on his name, but Penguin used to publish them. That's the only reason I remember it.
Oh, the Andrea Camilleri or whatever.
Camilleri.
That's it. Yeah.
Which, I mean, they're quaint compared to this. I mean, they are still like mysteries or whatever, but they very much celebrate the beauty of the Italian coastline and the food and all that sort of thing that Americans sort of love to imagine is like the real Italy. So they become these like sort of tourist advertisements for, Italy at the same time as being a crime book.
Yeah.
So I can understand why those were successful.
That makes sense.
Like, here's the nitty gritty of Milan in the 60s.
Yeah. But I mean, he was according to his Wikipedia page, he was an anti-communist, which should have helped him, you would think. But then I love this line from his bio. It says, while denouncing the evils of the rampant consumeristic and greedy way of life taking hold from the 60s onward, Scerbanenco always had a warm word for the peaceful, quiet, hard-working Milanese.
It's like, okay, Milan is not like the fashion capital of the world. So.
Yeah. Why do you think right now, so I know one of your other ones is a more Scandinavian author, or is a Scandinavian author. Why do you think that's the fashion right now, that people want the Scandinavian books? What is it about the Scandinavian crime that sets it apart from Italian and has been so powerful in attracting so many publishing deals?
Well, I think like anything, it's a lot of people following the leader, right? Like we had Stieg Larsson, and that just blew everything up, right? Everyone wanted the next Stieg Larsson.
Right. What about, I mean, is there anything that you could say about his thing that sort of captured the zeitgeist or is reflected in other Scandinavian writings?
It's hard to, I mean, I think with Stieg Larsson specifically, he definitely blew up the idea that, Sweden is this very quaint country without crime or an underbelly or any of that sort of thing, because they're so violent and so, even like the main character, Lisbeth, I'm blanking on Lisbeth Salander or whatever, is, covered in tattoos and piercings and all that sort of thing, which I think for a lot of Swedish people is like, whatever, of course we have that element. Of course we have Goths and whatever, like we're just like every other country in the world.
Right.
But I think for Americans, it sort of piqued their interest because we have these horrible preconceived notions about what Swedes are, which is, all of them are 6'2" blonde people that are, incredibly gracious and perhaps a little dim-witted, right? People think of them as like Canadians or something.
Oh my God.
I'm not saying I do. I'm saying that's think about Coach, right? Wasn't he the Dauber or whatever his name was?
And the TV show from the 80s that probably no one remembers except for you and I. Where he coached at Minnesota State, right?
Right. And like one of his assistants is this like 6'4" blonde guy. And he's constantly referencing Sweden. And that's sort of like the thing we've been fed, right?
Right.
So I think, that book the Stieg Larsson came along and just sort of blew that up. And that sort of cleared the path for Jo Nesbø, who had been writing beforehand, who is also Norwegian, we should point out, who had been writing beforehand but hadn't really taken off internationally. He's also much, much better than Stieg Larsson, which helps quite a bit. But I think it cleared the path for him to become much, much bigger later on. And then everybody else who kind of does exactly what Stieg Larsson was trying to do in recent years. When I was at the Penguin, and this is a while ago, 8 years ago, every week we would sit in an editorial meeting and someone would have the next Swedish crime writer, to the point where it just became a running joke. But some of those worked as well. Lackberg, is that her name?
Oh yeah, Camille Lackberg, yeah.
Camille Lackberg.
Right.
Pretty well. I think she's still writing. Somebody had to replace Stieg Larsson, who died young. And I know they continued the series, but, the appetite was so great that they needed other writers to sort of do similar things. And of course, there are writers willing to do that. So that's what happens. Just publishing is a lot of follow the leader. And, once one random thing takes off out of nowhere, everyone tries to copy it.
Right. I mean, I totally agree with that. I was just wondering if there's just to characterize the tone of them. Like, it sounds like the Italian one is the Scerbanenco is more sort of moral with dealing with that sort of police detective that seems a little bit more traditional, although reluctant, whereas the Scandinavian ones seem a little bit more violent.
Perhaps.
Oh yeah, and
quite violent. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, and seem more violent and more edgy in a sense, and less procedural. Maybe are the morals differently aligned? Like the Italian one you said are sort of by the book, but a little bit you go a little bit away. But my impression of Stieg Larsson in these is that you go pretty far away from the book and the what you're supposed to do.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And the way it's framed in Stieg Larsson, though, is that it's forced upon them by the corruption that surrounds them, which is kind of a theme of Jo Nesbø's as well. But all right, so I wanted to talk about somebody who predated both of them, Larsson and Jo Nesbø, and that is, I'm going to totally mispronounce these two people's names, but it's Maj Sjöwall and Per Wahlöö, who had written things independently, but then came together to co-write 10 books together, all featuring the same Swedish, from Stockholm, detective named Martin Beck, which is kind of weird for a Swedish.
Such an English-sounding name.
Yeah. Well, I think it's a little bit like I don't know. I have a lot of theories about this, but we'll leave them there. So basically, these were written between 1967 and 1994. And I don't know when Wahlöö died, not too long ago, but so maybe that's what stopped the series. But anyway, so yes, 10 of them between 1967 and 1994. And they all feature this Martin Beck, who is career detective, sort of older, has a grown child. He and his wife have a very sort of quiet life in Stockholm. And then, of course, there's always a crime at the beginning of the book. And he is, as the senior most detective, if not in charge. And this is another sort of trope in these books, is that there's always somebody who's the wizened person who's very good at his job who doesn't want to be chief of police. He's much happier just being a detective, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
He is that character, and he is very by the book. He and his colleagues, there's always, a rotating cast, but generally it's 3 or 4 other detectives that work with him. And they have, they have meetings that are talked about in the books. They have these, agendas. They have these, by the book ways of investigating, of interviewing potential witnesses, on and on and on and on. Everything they do from, the beginning to, the stings that they operate are done in this very by the book way. Which I think is very reflective of, Swedish society in general, is that people generally want things to go smoothly, and so they do their part to contribute to that. And the crimes themselves are so shocking to everybody in the book. And that's also a part that's sort of focused on generally, halfway through the book, they hit some snag and they can't find the guy they're looking for, and they don't even know who they're looking for. And they have to, reflect and say, oh my God, this is so horrible. There's always this moment of reflection where they have to comment on just how outlandish it is that this crime happened, and it happened in this neighborhood, and it happened to this person. And it's not just the detectives, it's always like the entire community, and it really reflects the Swedish sort of mentality that like crime is just not something that we need. We want to get rid of it. How do we address it? And so you get a lot of the plots involve, just average citizens sort of doing their part to chip in, and it's productive, unlike the way it would be in the U.S., where somebody gets on TV and says, "Oh, hey, have you seen this 6-foot guy with a beard and a baseball hat?" You'll get like 1,000 phone calls, right?
Yeah.
But in this book, people provide useful information, and these things sort of sort themselves out in the end. And the only other thing I will say about these plots, because there are 10 of them, I couldn't possibly they don't all they're not all the same.
Uh-huh.
But they have all been translated. I think they're now currently with what's it called, Black Lizard?
Yeah, that's what it looks like.
Anchor imprint. They the killers are generally portrayed as these like very psychopathic sort of people. Like,
oh, okay.
Not mentally deranged, they're just super smart and antisocial.
Huh.
And it's a weird sort of, line. Like, did you ever read the Derek Raymond, The Factory?
I did not.
But those are also done by Melville House. They always feature like just straight up mentally deranged people.
Right.
Like these are people that have like serious mental health problems, to the point like when they finally catch them, you're like, God, that guy should not be in prison. He should be in a mental hospital. In these Martin Beck books, the criminals are definitely like conniving and psychopathic in a very antisocial way. And I think that's like the point that I was trying to make about like Swedish culture, is that, they look down on antisocial behavior. Want everyone like do your own thing, but like, don't steal bicycles.
It's part of the community.
Yeah, exactly.
That's funny. The book, the Polish book that I read, the main kind of part of it is that a lot of it revolves around how far do you, what happens that makes you kill someone. So that is, rather than someone being psychopathic, it's like everyone contains this amount of anger or ability to kill someone. And maybe it's because that person, beat the shit out of their wife and they deserve to die. Or something else. Getting stuck in traffic is one that runs through this a lot, that he wants to kill the city planner for screwing up their traffic.
That's an interesting sort of thing. That reminds me of the first part of 2666, right? Which I always contend it was written exclusively to get to the part where they beat the shit out of the cab driver, right?
Oh, yeah.
Which the whole point being like violence lies within all of us. It just, it needs to be, it can be awoken at any time. And for them, it was, a confluence of events that led them to beating up a cab driver for no reason.
Yeah.
A bunch of mix,
Yeah, exactly. And Your Face Tomorrow has a lot to do with that too.
Right, exactly.
One thing to clarify, when you said the dates, I wonder if you were looking at the translation dates, because it looks like these 10 books were written from 65 to 75, which is when Per Wahlöö died.
Ah, okay. Oh, so was I looking at the movie dates?
That's possible. But yeah, it was one a year they skipped 1973, but it was one a year. Other than that, like clockwork, it seems. And then he died and everything stopped.
I will say,
yeah, you're right. The dates that you're looking at, the film dates. Yep. There's
one, I'm just remembering this now. I think if I saw the titles, hold on. There's one that features, oh God, is it Rosianna, the first one? Yes. So Rosianna, the first one in the whole series, an American woman is found killed.
Oh.
And it takes them forever to identify the body because she's American, but, she had been on a boat in Sweden on a canal, and no one knew who she was. This being the 60s, they had to write letters and schedule phone calls to police departments in the United States. And all of this took weeks to
Yeah.
sort out. And they wrote this, it was contemporary at the time, but reading it now, 40, 50 years later, it's this weird sort of look into how police work had to have been done all that time ago, where, we didn't have the internet, we didn't have cell phones, we didn't have international phone calls that were easy to make.
Right.
It's fascinating, really fascinating.
That is, there could be there. I'm sure that there are people have written things on like the evolution of technology as it relates to narrative, especially within these. The what you call it, the Patricia Highsmith books, The Talented Mr. Ripley, has a lot of that kind of aspect to it, where people are writing letters and like you can hide your identity because it'll take so long for them to,
Right, exactly.
find things. Do you have to read these ones in order? The Martin Beck ones?
No. They don't really reference each other in any serious way. I mean, it's helpful to know, you get a sense of who everybody is very quickly in each book. You would just get more of a sense if you read them in order, but I don't think it's important. I didn't read them in order because I was buying them sort of willy-nilly whenever I found them in used bookstores. So
Right. Oh, okay. And who's the third person that you're going to recommend?
And the third one is Wolf Haas, we have talked about before.
Oh, right.
When these came out with Melville House starting in 2013, it looks like. They've done 4 at this point. I'm going to blank. Okay, Brenner and God.
They've done, yeah, it looks like it's Brenner and God, Resurrection. Yeah, did they do the Bone Man too? Yep.
And so these are, again, we get these sort of outsider, these all feature the same detective. They're called, his name is Brenner. And Wolf Haas is Austrian. And these were written fairly recent, like 96. Yeah, 96, 97, up until, I don't know when the last one was, 2014.
Like 14, yeah.
So they're fairly contemporary. They all take place mostly in Austria, although they do like go over the borders of surrounding countries, every once in a while. They feature the same detective, Brenner, but he's not really a detective in the sense of, he works for the police force. He's also not like a former doctor. He is a former detective who, for reasons that I never found out exactly, partly because it's not in the 4 that were translated, unless I just it was too subtle. It just seems like he had a falling out with, somebody above him in the police force. And he's portrayed as like the good man forced out by the corrupt system. And he takes a series of like odd jobs. He's always got like a different job in every book. There's one where he's like an ambulance driver. There's one where he's sort of in between jobs and is like transporting cars back and forth between auto dealerships, that sort of thing. And sort of, like a Murder, She Wrote or something, just sort of stumbles upon these crimes. And then, because he's good at it, can't help himself but trying to sort them out. And they're very good. They're very funny in a weird way. A lot of black gallows humor. They move along very quickly, which is not to say the other ones didn't, but these are especially quickly paced. But what I found fascinating about them, and what I think is interesting just in a cultural sense, is that they reflect this idea, and maybe it's true, I don't know, that like Austria, seems like a very upstanding, sort of normal, quiet, sort of stuck up there in the Alps next to Switzerland and Germany, and I forget what's on the east, Czech Republic and some other countries over there.
Yeah.
I'm very bad at geography over there. But so like this, veneer of like just, rural normalcy outside of the capital, that shit is just crazy behind closed doors.
Right.
And I think this is something, true or not, that Austrians like reading about. I think they're fascinated by the idea that there's something just insane going on with your neighbor in his basement or something like that.
Which is why they love like psychoanalysts.
Right. There's definitely, like a lot of, there's also that sort of thing, which I hadn't remembered, like, weird relationships between family members, and everything's portrayed as this sort of murky mess of just, sin, basically.
Right. Which these are great. There's another Wolf Haas book that I haven't read all of these ones, only the Brenner and God. But his other book, The Weather 15 Years Ago, which is not a crime book, is really worth reading too. I was going to recommend that. It was a finalist for the Best Translated Book Award. And if I remember right, it's basically a interview with a guy who is a famous crime writer who's trying not to be a crime writer anymore.
Interesting.
So it's got like a sort of meta-reflective element to it. I have a different, semi-related question. Does Melville still do these crime books?
I assume so, but
Because I'm looking at their webpage, and I can't find a recent one. Everything's old.
That's weird.
Like 2011, 2014, 2014. I can't find anything after 2014.
Yeah, none of these look new. You're right.
Yeah, I wonder if something. Yeah, because it seemed like they're doing a lot of them, and they seem to be getting a decent amount of attention.
Isn't like let's see. Didier, I'm not going to know how to pronounce this. Daninik, Murder and Memorial in a Very Profitable War, which are Algerian, I think, are definitely more recent, but I don't know how recent.
They might just. Another problem is they might just not be on this Melville International Crime page,
right?
Because I don't see those on here. Oh wait, yeah, I do. Murder and Memoriam.
2012.
2012,
right.
Yeah.
Interesting.
It's kind of bizarre, but
do not know the answer to that.
Okay. Well, hopefully they keep doing them, I suppose.
Yeah, they have good taste. I wonder if it's just an economic decision that they've never been able to get these writers to take off. Beyond a small market, i.e., me. Because I love them, but yeah, I don't know. It's rare to meet people who've read many of these books.
They did corner the market on a certain type of thing here, though, really quickly.
Yeah, I know the Derek Raymond books barely sold at all, and they're famous in England, and they just don't care at all. And those aren't even translated. Those are just straight from English.
Right. Montalban books should do well, but probably didn't. This Craigslist Murders? What is this? That seems random to me. I feel like I heard about that. That came out a long time ago. I just never realized it was from them.
2011, yeah.
So weird. Very cool. But so that's a solid overview of some different types of crime writing from different parts of the world, and it's perfect for I'm going to use all of these in the class. Probably make them listen to this podcast. So if in the future they're probably listening to me tell them that they're going to be listening to this podcast, but. I guess we could sort of switch gears a little bit, and you wanted to talk about one other book, or we have some recommendations, I guess, of new crime novels that are coming out, or have just come out that I haven't read any of these yet, but I'm curious about 3 of them. They're all giant. I feel like they're perfect for holiday reading.
Well, I was going to say that I just read The Thief by Fuminori Nakamura. Who's Japanese and is published in English by Soho. And they have done, I think, 5 now, starting in 2010. So The Thief, Kingdom, let's see. Problem is I'm looking at just the page. Okay, Evil and the Mask, Last Winter We Parted. There's a couple more. Anyway.
Is Gun from him too, or is that from someone else?
No, that's from him.
Okay.
Yes. Yeah. They are more in the noir. The one I read, Thief, features a pickpocket who just sort of gets thrown into extraordinarily bad situation and has to pickpocket his way out of it. But you are clearly rooting for him. It's not unlike the movie The Professional, which has been made twice now. But Leon the Professional.
Is it really?
Yeah, he's, that guy's a serial killer. He's a contract killer who befriends a little girl.
Yeah, Natalie Portman. And in this book, he befriends a sort of a younger child whose mother is a prostitute, whose boyfriend beats him. And so he sort of, takes refuge in the streets, but then has to fend for himself and starts picking pockets himself. And so he sort of takes him under his wing, but also tries to get him away from this life of crime, et cetera. And so he's humanized and you want to root for him, et cetera. But
but they're very well done, very well written book about this life, and it's pitched as sort of existential, and it is to a certain extent. He definitely has these moments where he, muses on his life and his decisions and how things got this way, and repercussions and blah blah blah. But it's never too much. It all sort of blends in fairly seamlessly with the plot itself, and there's definitely like a I don't know what's a good example, like an Ocean's 11 sort of, you're trying to figure out how the plot is going to resolve itself, and he stays 2 steps ahead of you. And it's really, you really want to read it. I read it in like 6 hours. It was great.
That looks really good. I have The Gun at home. I don't think I have The Thief, but I've been wanting to read The Gun at some point.
I have 2 more to read, although I just picked up, as a sort of random aside here, I just picked up The Sympathizer.
Oh, did you?
The book that won the Pulitzer Prize for fiction last year, by the Vietnamese American. Writer. Oh no, he's born in Vietnam, raised in America. So Vietnamese American. His name is Viet Thanh Nguyen, and it reads almost like a thriller, more like a John le Carré sort of international spy sort of thing, but in a war setting, and the guy you're sort of rooting for is a bad guy.
Okay.
But it's very good. From the first sentence, you'll be hooked.
Cool.
I mean, I want the Pulitzer Prize. It doesn't need any more selling from me. So.
Yeah, this is true. And well, now they're going to see that spike in sales that they've been waiting for.
Right. It's not
Now that it's on here. The ones I have, like 3 books I was going to recommend. One that I want to read. Then for various reasons, the one that most intrigued me that ties into that is 6-4 by Hideo Yokoyama, also Japanese. And this sounds like, the description is pretty short. It's very long. It's coming up from FSG. It's 600 pages long. And it's basically about a girl is kidnapped. They never learn the identity of the kidnapper, never see the daughter again. 14 years later, the police department's press officer, a former detective, so you've got that former detective bit to it here too, revisits the botched investigation and is hoping to put it all to rest, but spots an anomaly, and then that leads to all the rest of the book. I think that's the engine that drives it. But the thing that intrigued me was that there was a David Peace quote on here. This is not only is 6-4 an addictive read, it is an education about Japan, its police, and its society, and simply one of the best crime novels I've ever read. And I'm a big fan of David Peace's crime novels and his soccer books, so that's enough to sell me on at least giving this a try. And it sounds pretty intriguing. I like did you ever read the David Peace Japanese books? Like Tokyo Year Zero? They're really cool, and they're different than the Red Riding Quartet, and do more with like the way that police functions in Japan, especially in like, I think the first one's like in the 60s or 70s, like that's earlier. And that they're very cool and more stylized in a sense. Not that the Red Riding Hood Quartet isn't stylized, because it is, the Red Riding Quartet, but this is a different sort of style. So I'm curious to see like how this Japanese book works. And I've got another one that's in the same general area, is The Borrowed by Chan Ho-Kei, who's a Hong Kong writer. And this is interesting because it's a Hong Kong detective who's like legendary, and it has a number of cases, I guess, that are within this particular book, and they're all organized chronologically in reverse chronological order, and based around major moments in Hong Kong history. So the first one takes place in 2013, then 2003, 1997, 89, 77, 67. So going back in time, all featuring the same detective. But they're not like, it doesn't read like they're like separate like novellas, but more like that's just how this whole book is constructed. And you get to see like the evolution of Hong Kong in reverse. And what's interesting is that one of the blurbs on the back, it says that it reminds them of the Swedish books by Maj, whatever you said, in Per Wahlöö. Which I love how many umlauts are on their names.
So many umlauts.
Wahlöö has 2 by itself next to each other.
Yeah, I'm sure we're mispronouncing those names.
Oh yeah. Maj Slowwall is what it looks like, but that's totally not right.
How do you pronounce SJ?
I don't have a clue. And the third one that I want to recommend is Thomas Rydahl's The Hermit. This is translated. I know about this because it was translated by Kyle Semmel, who's translated Naimari Eit's book for us, Rock, Paper, Scissors, and is the head of writers and books here in Rochester. And it, too, has this thing of, like, that you talked about earlier of the person who's not necessarily a detective but ends up in that role. In this case, like, a car is found with a small body of a small boy in the back seat, and it ends up that the person who's going to sort of solve this is a drunken taxi driver. So
great.
being an outsider, drunk, taxi, outsider, becomes detective, reluctant detective, solving the crime. And I know that Kyle's translated a number of books, some of which fall in this sort of genre, and this is the one that he's most excited about, and I guess it's in the New York Times this weekend, reviewed there too. So it won a bunch of Danish awards, like the Glass Key Award, Danish Debutante Prize, and the Harold Mogensen Prize, all of which I assume are important.
Yeah, I've never heard of them, but this Glass Key Award is a huge sticker on the cover. So.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, the Glass Key, I think, is the big one. I don't know what that means.
Yeah, this one sounds good. I think I would probably like that. I don't have any in my to-read pile. I'm looking. Don't see anything that falls into this category. Unfortunately,
that's funny. I have more than you do, and these are giant. I've been finding though, like I like going to the gym in the morning and running, and then biking for a while. And when I sit on the bike, I can read books, especially like this, that are just like sort of fun, plot-driven, interesting, enjoyable. So I've been finding more of these, like the thrillers or whatever, to use at the gym.
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty much all I read when I get on a plane or have I had to go to traffic court this morning.
Really?
Well, I had to contest a parking ticket, basically. I was successful.
Solid.
Going to municipal court is always such a fascinating hour.
It's so bad.
Anyway, but yeah, those things are like, these kind of books are great because they keep your attention. You forget that you're waiting or that you're being impatient, or like on a plane that you're uncomfortable, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
That's what I love for.
And they sort of open up that society in a different way. Like it seems like you can use crime as like a vehicle to be able to explore things about a particular society that you'd kind of labor at if you're doing it as a strict literary fiction book.
Right, which is why I think people like Manchette and even Simenon were so fascinating to read, because they are such they have so much social commentary in the books, but they're packaged in these 150-page sort of either noir in the case of Manchette or crime books in the case of Simenon. But you get so much detail about the sort of everyday political, sociological concerns about French people in those books, without it having to be, ponderous and literary.
Right. I don't think I have anything else to add to this thing, but do you have any rants or raves?
Can it be both at the same time?
Of course.
That's sort of what it is. But we watched The 13th, which is a documentary about the industrial prison complex system and its evolution over the last 160 some odd years since slavery was ended with the passing of the 13th Amendment. And it's both eye-opening and horrifying to see the ways that it's all put together and done, and the way our criminal justice system works against black men in particular. That is as horrible as it is. I feel like we should all watch it.
Okay.
But because it is very well done, and no one pussyfoots around. It is very hard hitting and effective. That's for sure.
Wow, this sounds really cool. And it's a Netflix movie.
It's a Netflix documentary, yeah. Which they've been doing pretty well lately with their in-house content, from the TV shows to documentaries and movies. They're really, really good these days.
Really, I've fallen so far behind on everything. I still haven't finished Luke Cage. I didn't watch Stranger Things. I'm off on everything. What's that?
We should watch these things.
I know. I just don't take the time. I'm too busy on other stuff and trying to read all these damn books to teach this class. Like,
fair enough.
Takes a lot of time. I'm putting a lot of effort into this class this time. I'm ramping up my game and trying to give it my all. Like, I'm not gonna half-ass it this time for once. Not that the other classes were half-assed; they're all fantastic, but they sort of like had them plotted out ahead of time. This is a sort of new version. I guess for my rant rave is the thing that I sent this to you, but there's this commercial that's on late at night on a lot of this ESPN or whatever sports I'm watching late at night. They always have this commercial for the Addiction Network, which is I think aimed at people who are drunk watching sports late at night. And it's got this guy who's like a sort of generic looking doctor who comes on and says a bunch of stuff about like how you need help and you can't do it alone. Addiction's a disease. Call this number. And then the ending of it, and I've seen this commercial probably 4,000 times, I think. It's on constantly, every commercial break. And I never really paid that much attention to it until the other night, where at the very end of the commercial, it's a minute long, at the very end, the doctor says something to the effect of like, the call is free, the referral is free, and if you have private insurance, you may not have any out-of-pocket expenses. All okay. And then the very last line of this commercial, which I can't, it still cracks me up because I don't understand it, is a kid, because they always have like people who are like, oh, I was addicted to heroin, and then I got help. And it's this kid who's supposedly a drug addict who looks at the camera and says, I wish my parents had insurance, then I could have gotten the best treatment available. And it ends. I'm not sure what the message is of his point there. Like, does the Addiction Network not help you then if you don't have insurance? Like, they're just like, well, fuck you. And he's like still just like a crank addict on this commercial, like wishing his parents had insurance so that he would be able to participate in this and get help. Like, I'm very confused by this commercial, and now I'm fascinated by it. And I just love that line. If my parents had insurance, I could have gotten the best treatment possible.
Do you think it's like an edited version in which there was something about Obamacare, and it's like a very subtle, plea to keep Obamacare because you can stay on your parents' health care until you're 26, I believe. But they edited out the part where this actually would have made sense.
That's an interesting theory. I thought of the Obamacare thing too, because technically everyone has to have insurance or you pay a fine or whatever, you get taxed.
Right.
So it's weird that like, are they implying that it's not? Because when he says private insurance, maybe he's saying that Obamacare doesn't count. Maybe you can't have Obamacare and go to the Addiction Network.
It's possible. Otherwise, they wouldn't be advertising on late night TV.
I just don't understand it, but I just love that they leave this poor fucker in there. This guy's just like, my life's screwed because my parents didn't have any insurance, so I'm just destined to be an addict. Oh, well.
Well, that is a very unfortunate comment on American society, but not something you usually get in commercials like that.
Nope. But anyways, that's all I've got for this.
Sounds good.
It's a long podcast, so I think we'll leave off, and hopefully we'll be back in a couple weeks.
Full of insight, yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, a couple weeks. We should try to keep these more regular.
Absolutely.
Now that we can focus on things like this. Although there's lots of other things to focus on too. But anyway.
And we can do previews of books that are coming out sometime soon too. End of the year stuff. We'll have a bunch more podcasts coming in the near future. So everyone who complains that this is very irregular, it will hopefully become slightly more regular.
Right. No promises. But
yeah. No promises by any means. But I've stopped traveling for a while now. I don't have to go anywhere until the beginning of December, and that's only for a few days. So it's much better than the past month where it's been like one thing after another, literally for a month. So anyway, okay, so everyone listening, we'll see you in a couple weeks.
All right. Mouthpiece like coins with a jubilant noise. Dudes rude and as useless as coins. Shoot 'em boys. Versed and rehearsing the soothing the loins. Talk to Joey, Earl, Kendrick, Cole. Gatekeepers afloat. They are extensions of instinctual soul. It's the highest of commodity grade, and you can get it today.
I wish my parents had insurance, then I could have gotten the best treatment available.